In true Crazy People podcast tradition, the zigzags on this episode are pretty interesting. From Aaron Schmookler getting his ass kicked on the Appalachian Trail by a moody teenager, to improv for business, from a safe job that he loved doing but hated the environment, to helping people and their companies sort of re engineer their culture. This is a great episode. Stay tuned.
All right, you guys, let's get it started then, right?
Because really, what could go wrong once you press record, right?
Exactly, what could go wrong? It's all got to be very perfect. Hey, everybody, very welcome to this episode of the Crazy People podcast. And two of the crazy people you already know, but we have a special guest today. And it's none other than Aaron Schmookler. Now, you got to help me with that name. Did I pronounce it correctly?
Perfectly. Yeah.
Wow, I'm almost proud.
Aaron pronounces it with a German accent as well, so it's fine.
But there you go. I can do the German accent quite naturally. So, hey, Aaron, thanks for being on the show. Thanks for being a guest.
Oh, thank you for having me. I never mind being called a crazy person.
You're surrounded by crazy people today, so it's a badge of honor at this podcast. So before we really start, we would always like to give our audience a bit of an idea who you are, what your background is, and just to warm up a little bit.
What my background is, my career, I suppose you could say, started as a lifeguard. Some of my first jobs were as a lifeguard. I then started taking kids out on backpacking and other wilderness kinds of trips and became a lifeguard instructor and a first aid and CPR instructor. Got a little bit of kind of wilderness first aid and all that kind of stuff. And that was my first foray, I suppose, into leadership. And in college, I got pretty heavily into theater, changed my biology major to a theater major and became a theater director. And that's where I got my master's degree. So I was a theater director. I owned a theater company for a while, and I've worked in corporate America. I've had a very nonlinear career. So I worked in a corporate job for a while, and I was doing what I think of as work that I love in a job that I hated, teaching theater and business communication at a public high school. And
wow,
when my wife told me she was pregnant, must be 9 years ago now, I just could not abide the idea that my daughter would inherit the prevailing work culture. And because I've had such a non-linear career, I've worked in a lot of different environments, and some of them were fantastic, and tons of them were troublingly toxic. Wow. And I just decided my daughter couldn't inherit that. And so I started this company with a friend called the Yes Works, where we are dedicated to changing the work culture for the better.
Wow, that is, Russ, do you see a common pattern here that what we talk about? So I here's my thesis. The idea of a linear career is not happening.
Yeah, it's a thing of the past.
Talk to somebody.
Yeah, the gold watch days are long gone. I remember looking through a catalog, being shown, these are the gifts that you will get if you stick around here long enough. And I did not. I did not stick around there long enough.
Yeah, see, my grandfather was an engineer on a aircraft carrier in World War II, came out of World War II and went to work for a large chemical company as an engineer, and retired X dozens of years later. And that was like super right in the lane. But today I hear so many people who are like, yeah, I started as A, and then I was W, and then I was B, and then I was Q, and then I was M for a little while, and then I was, all over the alphabet.
Yeah. I was not savvy enough at the time to immediately understand why they'd showed me this catalog of gifts that I was going to get over the course of the next 3, 5, 10, 15, 20 years. I just remember thinking, like, what is this for? And being a really curious person, I thought about it a lot, and I asked somebody, and they said, oh, they want you to feel motivated to stick around. And I remember whatever it was, the watch that I saw, I remember thinking, yeah, I would like to have that watch. That's a nice watch. I also remember thinking, there is no watch in the universe that would affect the decisions that I make about what I'm going to do with my life.
Yeah,
like what a strange thing to do.
If only I could have a watch, I would stay here for the next 25 years.
Right.
It's so great. No.
So how did your career happen? How did you zigzag, and what was the motivator behind it? Because it didn't just happen by accident, I assume here. And Russ will tell me what assume means.
Sure. I mean, I became a lifeguard because that was a cool thing to do, and because I love swimming. I was just a water bug when I was a kid, so it was an easy and obvious early job to take. A friend of mine in high school was a long time what would you call it, an attendee, a long time part of a summer camp. So when we graduated, he said, come and work at this summer camp. And I was like, I don't know, like, do I want to be a camp counselor? Not really. And he said, why don't you be camping and wilderness staff? And I was like, oh, well, that sounds awesome. What are some of the prerequisites for that? He said, well, you got to know camping and wilderness kinds of stuff. And I said, I know that kind of stuff. He said, you got to be a lifeguard. And I said, well, I am a lifeguard. And so that's how that happened. And I got my ass handed to me on my first trip, trying to lead kids up a mountain. One of these campers carrying a stupid heavy backpack, which was stupid heavy because she had put things in it that plug in, for example, and we're on the Appalachian Trail where there is no electricity. And I she stopped halfway up the initial mountain. Our first climb, she stopped halfway up and said, I'm not going anywhere. And I said, what do you mean you're not going anywhere? And she said, I'm tired. I'm not going anywhere. And I said, well, what are you going to do? She said, I don't care. That's your problem. Your problem. I said, what do you, like, we've got 20 miles to cover over the next few days. And if we don't cover those miles, we're not going to get picked up. The bus that brought us over here, that bus is gone. What do you intend? And I tried cajoling her, and I tried kind of threatening her, not with what I was going to do, but just simply what nature was going to do. It's going to get dark. What do you get? She would not budge until her friends came over and emptied her backpack and just distributed the stuff that she had in her backpack amongst themselves. And they headed up the mountain without her. They said, we got your stuff. Come on and follow us. And that was one of my most important and at the time kind of embarrassing lessons in leadership. I remember it was humbling. And I thought at the time, you know what, how old was I? I was 18, and I kind of I've never been a fan of humbling experiences that I didn't know what to learn from them because they're just painful. Yeah. That one I thought there is, I took some of the immediate lessons very quickly, and I thought there are even deeper lessons here for me to learn. So I don't mind being humbled. This leading people thing is kind of got me hooked. And so that is probably part of why I became a theater director. And I just love communication. I've grown up with a family that is of exceptional communicators. And the fact that I can take knowledge and ideas that are in my head and transfer them to you, and the fact that you can take knowledge and ideas that are in your head, even feelings that are in your head, and transfer them to me with an incredible degree of sophistication. And then the collaboration really that it takes to do it well. That's so fun for me. So that's how I ended up here.
As a former PSYOP, do you know what PSYOP is?
Psychological operations, right? So that's things
With
like
the Army.
what was it? Was it Manuel Noriega that they played music at in his compound?
But there's more elegant ways too, where they in Bosnia we distributed radios and distributed little tapes, and then they could play music, and every now and then there would be messaging in between, like, hey, these little signs that called mine, that's not mine as in yours, it's mine as in boom, right? And that kind of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I think of PSYOPs as the way the military messes with your head.
Yeah.
Right. On a collective basis, like, large scale messing with your head.
Yeah. No, it's really interesting, but that's what communication does to you, right? It's at the end of the day, it's just communication, and they use different forms of communication. The German PSYOPs cannot lie anymore. We have a bad history with lying, right? Let's not go there. And but the gray area, not saying stuff, it's already very interesting, right? Just to imply something and you never really say it. Yeah, but that's I see that communication is an interesting thing for you, and to do it in a business environment and then go to the theater, I believe the mechanics are somewhat similar. But at the core, because now you don't just communicate, you have to entertain too. So how do you work with that?
Well, I think there's a lot. I think that the people who believe that business communication is only about the transfer of technical data lose. And I forget who it was who said that we make decisions emotionally, and then we justify them intellectually. There's a tremendous amount of truth to that. And I think that there's a certain amount of the way I was brought up to communicate that makes me a dynamic talker, right? And I don't mean that in some kind of woo-woo fashion, dynamic that we can't define. I mean that I vary my pitch, I vary my volume, I vary my tone of voice, I vary my cadence, that things change. So literally dynamic. I learned that in part growing up with parents who speak dynamically. I learned that in part through theater. I learned that in part by being a keen observer of the way I'm manipulated by movies. And one of the things that I have been I feel like I'm shouting into the wind about in all these years since COVID began is, as a theater and film director, I manipulate you with lighting, and I manipulate you with sound. And people are still in poorly lit rooms, and you're Maurice, not in a brightly lit room, but there is a certain drama to the lighting. I can see the expression on your face. One of the things that I'm convinced, there's no science that I have to back this up, I am convinced that a large part of what Zoom fatigue is caused by is the strain that we put into trying to see people who are poorly lit. Because if I can't see what your face is doing, then I don't know if I can trust you.
Yeah.
If I can't hear your voice richly, and I can't hear the subtle nuances in tone and resonance, then I don't know. I can't tell as well what your emotional state is. And so that's a big part of where Zoom fatigue comes from. I know that in large measure because of my experience as a theater director and a film director. I do better on Zoom than most people because I've invested in making sure that I look and sound totally readable. And my hands are in view. deliberately, because though I don't think about it anymore, I'm certainly aware of the fact that if I keep my hands down out of sight for this whole conversation, you're not going to trust me as much. I'm not going to be as convincing. So there is an awful lot of psyops in telling stories in theater and film, and there's an awful lot of psyops in business, whether that's communicating effectively with your boss, communicating effectively with the people who report to you, communicating effectively with other partners in your ecosystem, whether these are vendors that you're hoping to negotiate a good deal with, or your customers that you're hoping to sell to. This is it's all psyops, because we are social creatures and we're affected so profoundly by the way we receive the other humans.
Yeah. The funny thing, what you say there is, first of all, I want to now desperately show my hands, right? Because you just said that. There you go with the style part. And the other part is that just, I think earlier today, I had a discussion with my wife, and she needs to do a presentation to her significant team. And she had a Olympian over, and he was teaching her and her team about the art of storytelling. Because relaying facts is one thing, right? And you forget about facts, but you don't forget about how whatever the person was saying to you made you feel. Right? So I had a mentor. He looked like a nutty professor all the way. He had like thin white hair. His glasses were sitting barely on the nose, right? And all the antics of a person like that. But something that he always managed is, he was like, and he, at that time we were doing M&A, so merger and acquisitions and so on. And he was like, investment is not about the product. The product is okay. Much like you said, right? There's some facts that you want to hear, and that's that. But everything else is about the people, because investors invest in the teams that they see, and the founding teams that they see in front of them. And if they don't know how to tell their story and make it a good argument why they're the right people to get this thing done, the facts can be whatever they want to be. The investor's going to go and take the facts and find somebody else to do it for them, right?
Right.
So it's, I think it's amazing that, and that the things that so many people haven't quite gotten yet, that yes, the facts are there, but the emotions and thinking about it, and how you react to people, and the nose factor, right? It's really, I would say, 3/4 of the entire story, right?
I don't know the numbers. I can tell
I'm
you
just
that
making them up,
if you're
and
overlooking storytelling, you are in trouble. Just like you said, people won't remember facts.
Yeah.
They will remember how you made them feel. I also, I no longer remember exactly how the professor that you were describing fits in. Now I'm starting to put it together again. I do remember the image that you concocted with his white wispy hair, and I thought, oh, kind of like Einstein. And then you talked about his glasses, and I thought, are my glasses sliding down my nose? The imagery of storytelling is huge.
So here you are at the theater. How did it get you from the theater to the Yes Works?
Well, a couple of pieces of that. One is, theater is a hard way to make a living. It's a hard way to make a living in part because there's not a lot of money in it. It's a hard way to make a living in part because theater, I don't think theater is, live theater is never going to die, but it is not in its heyday. Yeah. And part of what it takes to really become a great success in theater, I don't know that I was up for. Like, I like to be home. I was, as a married man, I didn't necessarily want to go travel to New York and to LA and to Chicago and all these places where theater is most thriving, and leave my life kind of lead my life as an itinerant. So that created some challenges. And then, as I said, I was teaching theater and business communication in a high school, which was work that I loved pretty well. And I hated the job. The culture of the public school system where I was working, I was not a fan of. There were so many policies. It was no longer governed by humans. It was governed by policies that had been put in place to ensure that there was no liability.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
it just meant that the system didn't work for any humans. It didn't work for the humans who worked there. It didn't work for the humans who had voted to put the school superintendent in. It didn't work at all, really, for the humans who were being educated. And it eventually just wore me down. And so then when my wife told me she was pregnant, I took that as an opportunity to go make a difference in an environment that I was controlling.
Yeah.
So I control my business partner and I, we control the environment that we're working in. And we're helping other people to create environments where people are not going to be pressed out of work that they love because they just can't stand the job.
Yeah, I imagine that. That's a funny thing, right? As soon as that child comes, the first one, right?
Right.
You take on an
Yeah.
entirely different perspective, and you're like, okay, this is not working.
Yeah, some people kind of hunker down and they decide to take less risk, and they kind of batten down the hatches and do nesting, whether physical or financial. I kind of did the opposite. I blew things up.
Yeah, I was going to say when my son was born, our son, I didn't have him. She did. I can't do that yet. But when our son was born, he was 5 or 6 months old when I started my first company, and it was that same story of I love the thing that I'm doing here for this company, but I know that I don't have a whole bunch of career advancement. It was a relatively small department in a large company. There's not a lot of places to go. We were living on Long Island at the time, so it was like an 1.5-hour drive each way. I'm like, I could probably use that time better doing something else. And said, it motivated me to take the leap too. So but I think, to your point, you see it as maybe it's going to be a risk, but it doesn't feel like a risk sometimes, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think it felt, you pardon me for the kind of ridiculous exaggeration I'm about to go into, and I sometimes find exaggeration clarifying. If there are some people, if this is my territory here, and there are some people out on the outskirts of my territory doing some things that maybe threaten my well-being a little, then I might be tempted to just let it go. But if I've got kids to protect, well, then I'm going to armor up and go out and face the danger. And that's a little bit kind of how it felt. It felt like maybe an equivalent risk, but with so much more at stake that it became no longer a choice. It was something I was obligated to do.
Mm-hmm. Well said. I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah. So tell me, the Yes Works, what are you guys doing?
We think of what we do as company culture engineering, because there are people think of culture as kind of this mystery, right? I've talked to a lot of business leaders who are just kind of like, our culture. I remember one business leader said, "Here is our culture," and handed me a stack of paper. And of course it had things written on it, but that is not what culture is. Culture is, how do people in a particular community behave? What are the contagious behaviors in a community? And your company is a community. And by the way, all behaviors are contagious.
Yeah.
So there are all these interdependent, many of them hidden forces that affect the way people behave. And so we've dedicated ourselves to helping leaders to see the matrix so that they know, why are people behaving this way? That's one of the one of the questions that I get most often is, why do my people do X? Why are my people at each other's throats? Why are my people not being accountable, even though I demonstrate for them every day what accountability looks like? Why, one of the people that I have, it's the week before Christmas. One of the only sales meeting that I've taken this week, aside from basically blocking out my calendar, is this man who's got a business that really serves our community, and I don't want him to suffer. And he is losing people all of a sudden, and he doesn't know why. And I'm helping him. I can see already. I can see a lot of the reasons why. So there are all these hidden forces that affect the way people behave, and we are helping to in phase one of the work that we do, we call prepare the soil. We help the leaders that we work with see where are these behaviors coming from, for the behaviors that they love and the behaviors that they don't. In plant the seeds, that's our second phase. We bring 8 principles of effective communication and collaboration. We don't just say, here are the 8 principles. Each one of them we put people through an intensive workshop that even people who hate workshops find fun. Not 100% of them, but pretty close. And these 8 principles, each has this kind of a sticky phrase associated with it. It gets a lot of reps through activity. It's very experiential learning. And our clients tell us that those phrases become part of the vernacular of the company without their ever having to do another bit of work about it. It just, they get stuck in. And years later, we've had a couple of clients say, wait, that's where we got this phrase. We forgot entirely that it came from you. It's just so much a part of who we are. And we also call them seeds because over time, the companies we work with evolve those principles into tactics that support those principles. And so then the water the garden phase is, we will bring you tactics to help accelerate that process. Here's a system of how to manage people effectively. Here's a system for how to effectively do problem solving and innovation when that is a priority for you. And we're working with a software company right now on, again, a term I don't really like is soft skills, because I think, like company culture, soft skills means it's a mystery, it's all squishy, but there are real specific, tactical, practical, essentially engineered algorithms that make some people socially adept and other people interpersonally inept. So yeah, we're helping them become more and more interpersonally adept so that they can really serve their clients well.
That is very interesting. I mean, I worked in a number of startups and I consulted a number of startups, and I think what people really underestimate, especially founders and people in leadership and so on, and is that it all starts with them. They are genesis when it comes to company culture, right? They are the ones that have to live, breathe, and speak whatever culture it is that they want to see in their employees. Because I think, and please tell me what you think about this, is I think that leaders so many times, or managers or whatever, right? Not every manager is a leader. But I think what they all underestimate is that even today, people look at them and they take their cues from them. So if you are misbehaving, absolutely, that's what they're going to do, right?
100% true. And if you are not giving what you are expecting back, then even more so, people will become instantly resentful.
Yeah, and something that I've learned too. So in the company that I work for now, people are very young, right? People are in their early mid-20s, and but what I realized, and I think what many underestimate, is their filters, and that might be a generational thing. I don't know if I was that inept at that point in time in my life, and I hope I used the right word, to really filter out the BS that somebody would throw at me and seeing my through it. I feel like the 20-year-olds now, they are so well trained with everything that they do, and they have their goals and whatever. They really see right through you if you don't are authentic with what you do and with your actions, and if you don't live that, right?
Yeah, you know, people talk about lately, they've been talking about the younger generations as being what's the word that they use? They're entitled, right? They talk about them as being entitled. I don't see it that way. What I see, and I think this is very related to what you're saying, Maurice, is there were fewer people when I think you and I were growing up who would simply say to the leader, that's bullshit.
Yeah.
We might think it, but we wouldn't say it, not directly to them. Instead, we'd have the meeting after the meeting where we'd leave the office and then we'd turn to each other and say, that was bullshit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so I don't think this is so much entitlement as it is just a more concrete, less abstracted world, because in part of social media, everything is so transparent. There's additional transparency. And then I think another thing that leads old fogies like us to call younger generations entitled is that there are options now that we didn't have. There are more human and more humane workplaces. So if I can have what I want over here, then why would I tolerate what I don't want here? That's not entitlement. That's called options. And so, you know, I imagine, you know, every time I hear somebody talk about the younger generation as being entitled, I will sometimes ask them, so are you telling me that if you were a miner in one of those company store kind of operations where you are getting further and further into debt by working for this company, in debt to the company, that you wouldn't choose, if you could, to go work someplace else that had a better, more favorable system? Would you consider yourself entitled, or would you just consider yourself intelligent?
Yeah,
it's the free market, and the free market has freed up some. That's what's going on.
Yeah, I personally, I like working with the younger generations because I think they're so much smarter than I was at that time. I came out of school and I was like, sure. And then I got drafted into the army, which at the time in Germany, that was still happening. And I was like, okay, I'm going to the army, I guess. And then once I was there, I was like, hey, they pay me, I can do stuff. Let's stick around for a couple of years and then figure out what we're going to do, right? And that's my dog coming in. He's like, hey, why are you talking? And then it got started from there. So if I can just imagine, and I don't want to see jealous, but I'm so happy for them that they seem to have a compass already, that they know where to go, what to do, and what to achieve that I didn't have at that time. It took me years to get there, right?
Yeah. Well, I remember my first job after college, in the job interview, they said, what do you want to be doing in 5 years? Where do you want to be in 5 years? I was like, I don't know. that's 5 years from now.
The funny thing is, nobody asked me that question.
If I'd known that question was going to be on the test, I would have studied for it. Come on, man.
Yeah.
So how does it work? How do you go in with those companies, and how do you achieve that turnaround for them? What are your steps?
The sales process itself, I'm committed that it's going to be valuable to the leader that I'm talking to. If they decide not to work with us, the idea is that they come out ahead with some really important insights. And then in this prepare the soil portion, we do things like stakeholder interviews. We interview employees. We interview people on the front lines and supervisors. We interview other stakeholders like customers. One thing that we do that I've never heard anybody else doing is we will interview their vendors, and we'll learn what's going on over there. How do you experience this place? One company that decided not to work with us many years ago came to us because they said, we just lost Amazon Web Services as a client, because what they said to us is, you all are a collection of individuals and not a team. And that puts us at risk because every single person becomes a single point of failure. So we will do a deep dive investigation, including interviews, looking at honestly, looking at signs on the wall, looking at handwritten notes on the microwave. We've gained some important insights from handwritten notes on the microwave about how are things and why are things the way that they are. There are a lot of companies that do culture surveys, and one of the reasons that we don't do culture surveys is that two key reasons. One is it evaluates trailing indicators, right? In other words, my house burned down. Okay, I know that there was a hazard, right? There's a pile of kerosene soaked rags in the corner. Well, that's a leading indicator that my house might burn down. I would rather notice the kerosene rags than the smoldering remains of my house. The other reason is that it treats everybody's voice as the same, right? If I am an employee who you wish you'd never hired and you've been looking for an excuse to fire me, and I say, I don't like X because of Y, and then the thing is anonymized, and Russ at the same time, who is an employee whom you wish you could duplicate, man, this was the best hiring decision we ever made. If he says, I do like X, especially because of Y, his voice is treated with the same value that mine is.
I'm curious about your opinion. Is what I see in business more and more is that people devalue conversation. So I'm doing sales now, and I rather talk to people, even though I'm the marketing guy, right? I don't use the PowerPoint that I prepared for sales in my sales conversation.
Yeah.
Because I rather talk to my prospects and get to know what they are all about, instead of showing them some slides that they can read by themselves, right? Yeah.
Even on Zoom, I take handwritten notes, and I share I take handwritten notes on an iPad, and I share my screen, on my iPad. Yeah. We are analog creatures, and we're analog creatures right now in a digital world. Anything that you can do to make things more analog is going to create traction. Yeah. And then I have people say, can you share those notes with me? And I say, of course. And I send them a PDF.
And the funny thing is, especially now that we don't seem to travel anymore, or not as much for every meeting, I think people still underestimate how important those face-to-face meetings were. Right? Yeah. Not for being there and showing your appreciation that you came to the office and to get miles and points and hotel stays, even though I appreciated those a lot, right? But I think it's just for the fact that you sit there, spend time with them, and break bread, right? It's almost, I think almost the time in between the PowerPoint sessions are more important than the actual sales sessions, right?
In the world of COVID, this might be a kind of a triggering thing to say. I think it's important to breathe the same air. Mm-hmm. There is something that happens simply when we breathe the same air, when we smell each other, whether we're conscious of smelling each other or not. There's something that happens when we're close enough to be animals in the same space.
Yeah, I agree.
I was talking with a friend of mine, and we were lamenting the Zoom culture, even when people are in the same town. Yeah, and they could physically see each other. It was just much
Yeah.
more convenient to get on Zoom and have a quick call.
I think you're right. We'll see how things correct over time. This maybe isn't totally relevant to our conversation, but it makes me, what you're saying, Russ, makes me think about another one of the things that I think leads to Zoom fatigue is this, right? Is like, I've got to be looking at the camera. I've got to be, this like, I'm not allowed to break eye contact. But we never have in-person meetings like that.
Right.
Now, I make a point very often of telling people that I'm in Zoom meetings with, I've got all my windows closed. This is the only window on my computer that's open. So if you see me looking out over here, I am actually looking out the window. I'm looking out the window. If I look over here, I'm just looking at my fish. And as people, we look sometimes away from the person we're talking to so that we can listen better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And we've got to give each other permission to, we've got to give ourselves the boundaries, the easy escapes by closing windows, and then give each other the grace to allow ceiling staring and floor staring. And we can demonstrate our listening by our responsiveness.
Now I want to zigzag a little bit though. How was the start? How was it starting this company for you? How did it happen?
So initially we started this company thinking what we're going to do is improv for business. That's right. I mean, I remember reading all of this stuff about how many businesses and how many MBA programs are using improv to help people learn to communicate and collaborate more effectively. So that's what we were going to do. We were going to do improv for business. And I reached out to the best improviser I know, Adam Utley. And I said, Adam, let's do this thing, improv for business. And so we started doing that, and it was fun and it was hard. And we got some really early wins. We made some quick early sales. I was like, this is going to be like shooting fish in a barrel. And then two things happened. One is we started noticing what I think of as false negatives, people who said, no, that won't work around here, when I knew it would, from experience, right? From the experience of the clients that we'd had already. I knew it could work, and it was difficult and or impossible to get people off of the idea that that won't work around here. And then the other thing that happened was we got to know more and more about other companies that were doing improv for business. And what we were doing was so drastically different that we knew we had to stop using that brand, because it was, according to essentially what that brand, what that category had been created to be, it was not what we were doing. One of the most famous principles from improv that is part of our work as well is yes and. And that's where most improv training begins, is this principle, yes and. Whatever I say, you've got to say yes to it, and. Thank goodness for Adam, my business partner, because I likely would have started there as well. And what Adam said to me is, this is an advanced skill. We've got to build up to it. So people have been working with us in our workshop for 3 hours before we get to this principle. And it doesn't mean that I say yes to everything that you bring me. You know, if you were to say, all right, here's our marketing ploy, we go up to the top of the building and we start telling people that if you come in, we'll give you $1,000, and then it doesn't matter what you do with it. Like, you can walk right back out with the $1,000. Like, that's not a good idea. Nobody's going to say yes to that. And in order to be a principle, this has got to be universally applicable. So yes, and doesn't mean that I agree to all of your suggestions. And as one of our clients said to us, the last time I learned this, people in my team would turn to me, turn to each other in meetings, and they say things like, yes, and you're an idiot. And that's completely antithetical to what that principle is about.
Yes, and I hate you. Oh no, stop that. Just go back, try again.
Not to mention, yes and is a very clunky thing to say.
Yeah.
It's not how we talk. And I rarely say those two words back to back, though I use that principle all the time.
Hey, let's go back to when you were 16.
Okay.
Knowing everything that you know now, what would you tell your 16-year-old self about life, business, anything for that matter? What would be your 3 top tips to that young Aaron?
It might be, don't worry, enjoy the ride, right? That's it. Like 2 tips. Don't worry, enjoy the ride. It's going to be fine. It might be that. And it might be so, I would hope, I don't know when the book, say, The Go-Giver came out, but it might be go read this book, or it might be go read How to Win Friends and Influence People, which maybe was the best thing available at the time. What I did not understand when people said things like your net worth is your network is your net worth, I just didn't understand that. It sounded Machiavellian to me. Mm-hmm. And it sounded very objectifying, right? It's like, you are nothing but a resource to help me advance my ends. That's what people are. And so I didn't, for the longest time, I didn't think about building a network. I didn't think about contributing to a network. I didn't think about my life as being dependent on other people, because in part because I valued independence so much. And I now have just a much more organic, holistic understanding of that idea, right? How to win friends and influence people. Even that title put me off for the longest time. I didn't read that book because I didn't want to win friends. I wanted to, earn friends, maybe. I wanted to have friends, and I wanted to be influential, but I didn't want it to feel like what I was there to do, right? It's like, I am going to win friends and influence people. So
definitely feels like a curly mustache moment, right?
Exactly.
Or like one of these.
Yeah.
The Simpsons reference.
And so I started to figure it out late in life through podcasts, and I think on one of those podcasts I was recommended to read the book The Go-Giver, and it's really transformed things for me. So if there was some way that I could impart to my 16-year-old self either the understanding that I have now, or at least the seeds or the places to send myself where I would get those understandings, I'm sure a lot of things would have been a lot easier. There would have been a less suffering. There would have been more success and more wealth and things like that, and more fun. And fun is, I'm a big fan of fun. I kind of figure if it isn't fun, I'm probably not going to do it for very long.
One day we're going to ask that question, and somebody's going to go, that summer lifeguarding job, save every penny and buy Apple stock. That would be my advice to my 16-year-old self. But the fact that we haven't heard it yet is probably indicative that having more money is probably not the answer to everything in the whole world, right? So,
no.
Yeah.
No, I feel like I have, I've been wondering how I'm going to pay my mortgage, or not mortgage. I've been wondering how I'm going to pay the rent, how I'm going to buy groceries. And I've been wonder what I'm going to do with all this. And I have just about as much fun either way. There's a little less fear when I'm not wondering how I'm going to, cover my basic biological needs, but just as much fun.
I think that's a great ending to this interview. Hey, I really appreciate it. It's that conversation was right in my wheelhouse. A slightly psyopsy. That's a new word, trademark.
Psyopsy.
TM.
Excellent. This has been really fun for me. I hope that I haven't made this conversation too much like my career, and that it was really non-linear. And I know I've talked about kind of the work that we do for companies in general. If people want to be straight up better managers, then we also have a program that we run to bring people in from the outside of wherever they are, help them become managers who drive performance with compassion and heart. And that's, it's, I feel like in doing all of these things, I'm doing my life's work. So it's always fun for me to talk about it. So thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for being a guest. Thank you for
awesome.
enlightening us and for this really fun conversation. It was fantastic.
Thanks, gents.
Thanks, sir.
All right. Thank you so much. And obviously for all of you guys watching,